All right. Good morning and welcome back. Everybody able to access or have access for the makeup class online on the virtue of temperance? If not, it should be. Please let me know if it's not working. Any questions on any of that material or anything else that we covered last week?
Question on material about the quiz.
Yeah.
I think on one of the questions I put in everything correctly, but still it was wrong.
I will. I'll review it. So, yeah, I'll review it, make sure. So, the quiz, the participation assignment is due tomorrow. Always remember, you also have unlimited attempts. So keep trying as much as you want, I guess, if you want to get all 10 of those points. So technically, that doesn't really stop even after the due date. So if I'm regraded and you want to try it again, more than welcome to. So if you want to make up week one, you're quite welcome to make up week one. Just remember though, it's not that many points in the overall grand scale of the class work and class assignments and all that. Make sure you've gotten into me your morality reflection paper that was due end of the day Friday. So I'm going to grade those some point this week. So if you haven't gotten it to me, sooner the better. Any other questions or concerns or anything like that? Dear Prudence, won't you come out to play? Dear Prudence, greet the brand new day. The sun is up, the sky is blue. It's beautiful and so are you. Dear Prudence, won't you come out to play? We talked in the last class, online class at least, about the virtue of temperance. What was temperance again? What's the basic definition of temperance?
Right use of moderation of worldly goods.
Right use of moderation of worldly goods, right? How is it though we can know how much is enough versus too much and too little? Is it merely feeling? Is it merely just, oh, I've ate too much or I've not eaten enough? No, it's more than that, especially for us rational creatures. For we who are able to use intellect and free will to make rational decisions, or are supposed to be able to, whether we do or not is a question. So in other words, in order to be able to exercise temperance and even to exercise the other virtues, we need to exercise the virtue of prudence. What was our basic definition of prudence? When we went through the list of all the cardinal virtues and theological virtues, what was the basic definition of prudence?
The right discernment and application of the self.
Right. Right discernment and application of the self. It is practical wisdom, or just good sense, or even you could say common sense. Merriam-Webster dictionary offers a more fuller definition as a virtue that disposes us to see rightly the way things are in the world around us and to employ that truthful vision to act rightly. In looking at this in a specifically Catholic context, the Catechism of the Catholic Church says, prudence disposes a person to discern the good and choose the correct means to accomplish it. One of the major theologians of Catholic tradition, Thomas Aquinas, calls it right reason in action. Right reason in or converting into action. Since we have this ability to think and to ponder and to reflect on everything, not just our actions, but the world around us, we are called to apply it and to use it well. We need to do this in a moral perspective. Hence, we need to practice, to cultivate and to practice prudence. What comes to mind, besides those definitions, what comes to mind when you hear prudence? What do you think of? Anything else? Anything more? Name. The name. The Beatles song. How might you say you apply prudence in your own life? Anybody have any? Anyway, yes? Okay. Working on your assignments, working on your classwork, your coursework. Others? Do you have one? Wisdom, yeah. But remember the other part, I think we often can think about prudence more in an intellectual way, as in choosing or deciding. Yet our definition talks about right discernment and application. Why? Because we are not just thinking creatures. We are acting creatures. We do or we don't do. We act or we don't act. Morality is not just concerned with choice. It is concerned with action as well. Prudence helps us to be able not only to know the action that we need to do, but to apply ourselves to do it. To be able to weigh all the things, put it on the grand scale, or to say, which is actually more important? Which do I need to do? And then to do it. So it is not only deliberation, but also acting on that deliberation. Why? Because we can think about something until we're blue in the face. But it's one thing to think, it's another to act. I may think about changing my major or working on papers or coursework. But if I don't actually do it, then all of that thought is for nothing. It's useless, it's wasted time. Prudence is often described in antiquity as the charioteer of the virtues. We all probably have in our minds, the fancy ancient chariots of Greco-Roman times. The horses are pulling the cart behind it, but without any direction, without any discernible means of control. It would all just go about wherever. Prudence is necessary as a means of helping to direct the other virtues, at least in the natural sense. We cannot be temperate without being prudent. We cannot be just without being prudent. We cannot have fortitude without being prudent as well. Prudence is the immense use of our intellect, of our rational faculties in the moral life. The other virtues are how we apply it kind of out from ourselves. Prudence is very much at times an internal exercise. Temperance deals with goods. Justice deals with others. Fortitude is ultimately having that courage to do something. But that prudence is knowing what to do and applying ourselves. Catechism, in talking about the Catholic exercise of the virtue of prudence, says, with the help of this virtue of prudence, we apply moral principles to particular cases without error and overcome doubts about the good to achieve and the evil to avoid. So through the exercise of prudence, we come to discern what is good, what is evil, or not to praise this, to do this, to shun that, to shun evil. Why? Because not everything is so clear-cut. We at times want the world to be seen as black and white. Right? Clearly good, clearly evil. Do this, don't do that. But more often than not, it is far grayer. Why? First of all, because like we talked about in temperance, we are emotional creatures. Right? We are not just rational creatures. We are emotional as well. And at times, our emotions can hold greater sway over our reason. We get angry, we want to act immediately. We get sad, we want to act. We get happy, and we want to act. But just because we may feel that emotion does not give that action greater moral value or makes it more good. Whether we did something in calmness or in anger does not make it less good or more evil. We must still value, judge, discern what it is outside of our reasons, or outside of our emotions. Monday morning, just after 8, you had to make that decision. Well, kind of a cold morning. It's probably very comfortable laying in bed. Maybe you had a good weekend. You slept in and you enjoyed yourself. You had fun. You relaxed. This comes, and what do you want to do? You're just going to smack the snooze, smack the snooze. No, I don't have to get up. I don't have to get up. Prudence is understanding outside of maybe how I feel, I must act in a certain way. Beyond what my emotions may be saying, I don't want to get up. I don't want to wake up. I don't want to have to go in. I still must do it. Why? Because we are meant to be pursuing the good, right? We talked about that before. What does pursuing the good lead us to? What perspective of morality do we focus on here more? What's that?
Virtue.
Virtue, yes. But what does virtue ultimately gain for us? Happiness, yes. We pursue the good because the good leads to our happiness. Not just because we're obliged to do it, because we compromise. No, because these things lead to our happiness. So with exercising the virtue of prudence, we are saying, well, it may not feel good right now, but this leads me towards happiness. I may think I may be happier sleeping in, or skipping class, or not doing my work. But in actuality, I will be happier if I do these things. That takes exercising prudence. They will say, this is the better decision to make. Though it may feel, ugly, terrible word, not make me feel great in doing it, I will be better because I do it. Why? Because life is full of choices, right? We talked about that before. We are free creatures, able to act. But we have to make choices. We think that freedom is something to do whatever I want. That's not really true. Why? Because there's only a finite amount of possibilities that you can make. There's only so much that you can do based on what you have, what you're able to do, what is even possible. We have to make choices in life. But we are supposed to make the right choices, the good choices that will lead toward that full happiness, especially in the Christian context, that eternal happiness. But we have to get ourselves into the practice of making those decisions. So, what can prudence do for us? There are three roles that prudence has in its exercise or in practicing it. First of all, prudence allows us to set up a specific means or a specific path for putting virtuous desire into action. It's shortened as a means to virtue. We make the decision that university is necessary, whether we want to call it good or not. It's at least necessary to engage in university, to be able to be successful in life. Let's phrase it that way. Whether that means a job or whether that means the work that we want to do. University is if for whatever we're doing. So therefore, we have to bring ourselves to doing everything we need to do to be successful in university so we can be successful past university. So we must exercise the virtue of prudence then to be able to be successful here and now, which, as we talked about, talking about why we do virtue overall, can be a great predictor of how we will do in the future. Because for most of us, what happens here applies in whole or in part to our life beyond this, past or beyond. So prudence helps set up the specific means to putting that virtuous desire into action, to actually making it a virtue. Remember, a virtue is a habit. We can have virtuous desires, but unless we put them into action, they're not virtues. Second, though, which in a certain sense we should really ask before even this, is determining what is virtuous. How do we actually know what is good, what is evil? How do we know what is to be pursued versus what is not to be pursued? We have to determine that for ourselves. Now, what our source for determining that can depend, can vary. But at the end of the day, we still are responsible for determining that for ourselves. Whether we do that rightly or wrongly remains to be seen, but we still have to do it. We have to say, what is something that is virtuous for me in my specific place, in my specific talents and abilities, or my specific pursuits? Being here at university, you should determine that which is virtuous is applying yourself to your studies. Now, of course, that may vary in specific ways based on what you're able to do. Are you a better reader? Are you a better listener? Are you better working on your own? Are you better working in groups? But if you want to pursue the good of education, you have to determine specifically for yourself what is virtuous. Finally, not just providing that means not just determining what is virtuous, but above all, prioritizing our priorities. Why? Because we have a multitude of intentions, don't we? We have the big picture intentions. We have the day-to-day intentions. We have all the various intentions in between. And there's only so much we can do, right? It's only 24 hours in a day. We spend a third of that, more or less, sleeping. So we've already lost 6 to 8 hours of the day. You're sleeping more, you're sleeping less, get in that range. Very good. As we talked about before, we are not truly free to do everything. This world is finite in every sort of realm. Time, space, material. Our life is set at a certain length of time. It may be longer, it may be shorter than some. Scriptures talk about our life is 70 years, 80 if we are strong. I think the average right now is peaking, is getting very close to 80 for males and females. Women usually are longer lasting, so you got that going for you. There's only so much we can do. So we have to prioritize what is important. Prudence helps us to do that if we exercise it correctly. To say, well, I want to relax. I want to just play my games or watch my shows or, hang out with my friends. But it's actually more important for me to do this, to go to my job and work, or, to do my studies, or, to do this or to do that. X, Y, and Z, whatever you want to fill it out as. To set those priorities and to maintain those priorities. Why? Because we are tempted. We are tempted in our weakness, in our frailty, to give in to the lesser things. Now you may say this sounds very similar to temperance, and there is some overlap between temperance and prudence. Temperance, though, is more concerned with how we use things. Prudence is more concerned, above all, with how we use our time. Temperance will say, how much water, how much food, how much sleep I must have. Prudence will say, how much should I be doing of this action versus that action? Should I be doing this more? Should I be doing this less? In all of these things, then, prudence, when exercised, helps us to do that. So how is it that we can do this? How can we do all of these things? The greatest means we have of cultivating the exercise of prudence, and with it, the exercise of the other virtues, is education. Why is it that we are so concerned with you spending so much time in schools? Not just you specifically, but with all of humanity. Why is it we dedicate at least 12 to 13 years for people to go through the system, if not even longer? Because these things are necessary to form individuals. If done properly, to form them to be good moral subjects, to be able to exercise these virtues, especially prudence. We want you to know and to understand the world around you, so that you can then be able to do whatever your part is in it. Why is it we make you study all these various subjects? To understand all of them as best as possible, so as to have a foundation upon which to build your life, especially your moral life. Education is not meant to be just about facts. If it's just about facts, you can look that up on Wikipedia or other more reliable sources, but Wikipedia is usually our first go, isn't it? Education is not about facts, merely about facts. It is about applying those facts in living our lives. So each subject that we study is meant to help us to do that. The sciences, to help us to know what all of this does, how all of this works. The arts, to help us to be human, that which is most uniquely human, to be able to express ourselves in thought, in word, in pictures, in sound. To be able to know the human story from everything before us up to our time, so that we may be able to create our own story in union with the rest, the grand story of humanity, as it were. Education is meant to help us to exercise these virtues. If it doesn't do that, it is a waste of time. Or it's just a grand babysitting exercise. Which perhaps is what it's starting to become, at least in the lower grades. Who knows? This is why, in the Catholic tradition, we have been concerned with institutions of learning and education. Why we established the university. Why is it that it's even called that? What does it look similar to? A word that we use in English. Universal. What does universal mean in kind of the everyday use? What does it mean? Like kind of all, the be all and end all, right? Everything that exists, everything that is, or has been, or will be. Not just applied to our particular place, our particular time, our particular selves, but to all peoples, to all times. The universitas, as it was called in Latin, was the place to talk about all of these things. Not just specifics, not just learning the basics, but to be able to apply those big picture things and to be able to apply them in our own, in the individual's lives and society's lives. Why? Because we live in a society. We are not individuals, just cast off on our own. We are meant to be part of society. What happens to one happens to all. What happens to all happens to one. Our education shapes our exercise of prudence, and with that, the exercise of the other virtues. Why? If I teach you that beating animals is a good to be pursued, that will affect how you treat animals, won't it? If I teach it to you at a young enough age, if I enculturate it in every way, not just you right now as more adults who have had far more experiences, but if I start from young to teach you that will shape how you see animals for the rest of your life, probably, won't it? Not exclusively, not saying you can't change. Of course we can change. Education is not restricted, of course, to what we learn in our youth. In fact, more often than not, we learn more as we get older, or we learn in a more refined way. But whatever the seed that we plant in education is what will grow throughout the rest of our lives. Now, a tree can be trimmed, it can be uprooted, it can be grafted upon. But there has to be something there. So education is that means of starting all of that. Your education doesn't end when you get that fancy piece of paper at graduation. And you may have the base, the foundation, but you have to go and to apply it yourself. You have to build off of it. A foundation is only good if we use it for building. Otherwise, it's just a nice, big, empty plot. So education is a vital part of forming the virtue of prudence. Because it is how we begin to form that habit. Why? By forming our understanding of what is good, what is evil, what is true, what is false, what is just, what is unjust, what is right, what is wrong. Coming to understand all of those things and then living them out. And of course, like I said before, we can grow, we can change. Our understanding can deepen, or we can change our paths. We can come to realize something we learned may be wrong, or may not be the whole truth or the easy truth that I want it to be. Have there been examples like that in your life? Something you thought was easily understood, but you've come to realize is more difficult than you can fathom? Any examples of that? Sure.
So, since I was very small, that I wanted to study animal behavior.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was very black and white until I hit high school age.
Mm-hmm.
And when I started to study it more deeply, I realized it was far more complex than I ever thought it was.
Mm-hmm.
It turned out really good, but it was definitely much more than I ever thought it would be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a good example. The behavior of animals. If they're hungry, they eat, right? If they're scared, they fly or fight, right? No, it is more complicated than that. Others? Other thoughts, other ideas? We get into the sciences. We talk about, the atoms, for example. You think, oh, it's that nice, that nice little nucleus, and they're just the electrons all going about and about, right? Then you start getting into the deeper stuff with string theory, quantum theory, things like that, talking about how these things can even exist. It can be like that in any subject. I loved space as a kid. I loved spacecraft and all that. Thought, I'll be a rocket scientist, all that. All you got to do is just build a big enough rocket and it just goes up and goes over, right? Oh, it's far more complicated than that. There's a lot of science to put something even into the sky, let alone to put it into orbit, let alone to shoot it off to the moon or anywhere else. A lot of work that goes into that. It's not that things are more difficult per se than when we first imagined. It's that our awareness of all the variables has changed. Moral decisions that seem to be far easier, maybe we were little, become a lot harder. Because there's a lot more things pulling at us. We know that our decisions carry greater weight the older that we get. Looking back at the mistakes that we've made or the good that we've done and trying to weave that path. So we don't want to stray too far in our choices. It's easy here and now to make the decision for what your career is going to be. It's harder to do that when you're 30, 35, 40, 45, 50. When your time is less, it's harder to learn. It's harder to start over. But prudence helps us only insofar as whatever we give it. How does a tree grow? What does a tree need to grow? What are the basics it needs to grow, right?
Sunlight and water.
sunlight and water. There's a third element as well. Fourth element. Earth, yes. The soil it's in, the air it's in, the water it gets, the sun it gets. If any of those are lacking their peak or max value, or cleanliness, or nutrition, the tree does not grow as well. The same can be said of our education and our application of that education. But no matter what it may be, we are still called to apply ourselves to it as much as possible. Now, within the virtue of prudence, there are some subvirtues. So some lesser virtues that assist the overall exercise of prudence, that help us to live it out. The first is memory. Well, you'll say, well, how is memory a virtue? It's just me recalling something, right? No, in this specific instance, this subvirtue is truth in recalling the past. It's not just recalling it, but recalling it rightly and truthfully. Why? Because we can cloud our memories with our own opinions, can't we? We get in the middle of a fight, and we may think of things only from our side or only from our perspective. And even then, it can be a tainted perspective. We may not recall the actual events, but how we think it went down, whether for us or against us. So we need to be truthful in recalling what happened, that we may learn from it and make better decisions in the future. So the first is memory. The next is docility, next subvirtue of prudence. Docility is the willingness to accept guidance from others. The willingness to accept guidance from others. Why? Because we do not know everything. The older you get, the more you realize that. We do not know everything. If you were to start a job today, would you know how to operate the basic system from the logging in your hours? If you start at some of these bigger chains with their own intricate system for logging purchases, whether Amazon or the hardware stores, things like that. Would you know how to handle the system right away, immediately? No, you have to learn it. We have to be willing to have guidance from others, to know what it is that we need to learn. Only then can we actually see if it is something we need to learn or not. So if we close ourselves off, if we cover the ears of our mind to be unable to listen, we won't be able to know what to do. So we need docility as well as that memory to be able to learn. The last is one that's not as easily translatable. So it often goes by the Latin. So lerpsia. Solertia. So lerpsia. Which can kind of be a nimble decisiveness or a nimble shrewdness. But solertia is the ability to quickly grasp a situation and to act for good goals. Now, of course, we think of this. We can think of this in terms of emergency situations. We're driving down the road, an accident happens in front of us. How can we help in that way? But that may not be, it may not be that drastic of a situation in which we need to exercise solertia. We may also need to do that in a situation that comes up in a good way in the midst of a life. Not the grand, deep emergency happening right before us. There's something that suddenly happens in front of us. A fight breaks out in the middle of school. We're sitting, we're at our, we're back in high school, we're at our lockers. They're trying to do someone's all of a sudden getting into a fight. What do we do in that situation? Do we fight? Do we fly? Do we try to break it up? Do we go to the teachers?
We go to the teachers, help them work it out.
There could be various things depending on our abilities, depending on what we can do. But we have to practice that. We have to enculturate that. That shrewdness, that decisiveness, that quick decisiveness. It's not like we can sit there and go, oh, well, let's see. What did my teachers tell me to do? What are the good things? No, sometimes we have to act within a few seconds. If I were to come in here and plop a quiz right on you, you have to be decisive in trying to answer it to get the best score, right? You wouldn't have time to study, would you? Life happens very fast at times. We don't often get the ability to be able to think long or hard or deeply about what needs to be done. Sometimes we have to act in the moment. All right, this is what needs to be done, and do it. Exercising that prudence overall can help us to be better decision makers in those moments, so that it's not so difficult, it's not so hard. So these three things help us to exercise prudence overall. But we need to talk more deeply about how to exercise prudence, especially do that in terms of our conscience. That we will cover next time. Thoughts, comments, questions on anything from today? If you haven't, be sure to view the temperance video. The participation assignment is due tomorrow, so get that done. If you haven't done your reflection paper, that needs to be done as soon as possible. So if not, be sure to read the assignment posted on Canvas for Wednesday. a reading from a theologian in the 19th century talking about conscience. We'll talk about how to apply the prudence, what the conscience is, and how we apply it to all of that on Wednesday. We'll see you then. Have a good day.